to the Romans.
Just because you want to rule the world, you think everyone else is happy to be made a slave?
In this episode, I wanted to talk about the Roman Imperial Cult. I want to talk about where it came from, the progression of it, why it's called the Roman Imperial Cult, and what's left of it today. The Roman Imperial Cult is the foundation of the Catholic Church. I want to get into that because it kind of blows my mind that scholarship doesn't talk about the transition of the popes from the Pontifex Maximus of the Roman Imperial Cult over to the Christianity as a state religion under Constantine. The reason why they use the word imperial cult is because it is actually trying to adopt foreign religions into their own. In the ancient days, the biggest form of propaganda was religion. To get people to be on board with your imperial nation, you wanted them to believe that you were some sort of divinely appointed king or emperor in which they would have no choice but to follow suit and pay your taxes. So officially, the Roman Imperial Cult started in the time of Augustus, in the beginning of his reign in 42 BC, right at the time of the deification of his father, Julius Caesar. Now, before that, Roman religion was basically divided into two. There was the Roman religion, which got its basis off the Etruscans, and then there was Greek religion, which got its foundation from Homer, Hesiod, and the Hittites. The union of these two is what birthed the Roman Imperial Cult. The term Pontifex Maximus, which we know as Pope, in Latin means high priest or great priest. That goes all the way back to as far as human records can tell us. Plutarch writes that the term Pontifex Maximus was used before roads were even built. Plutarch himself was a priest at Delphi. He wrote a lot of treatises on the gods, particular Isis, Osiris, Dionysus. Rome saw itself as a divine ruling nation, destined for glory. This actually technically started with Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great conquered all of Asia, and as he goes into Asia, basically learning about other religions. So he goes into Afghanistan, he learns about the Buddhists and the Zoroastrians, and they bring these ideas back to Greece and apply it and write about it and revise it and make their own versions of these things. And what you get over time is you get these amalgamation gods. For example, Serapis. Serapis is the final product of taking Osiris and the Apis bull and meshing them into one deity. Also, you'll see that there was a god named Abraxas. He looks like a gladiator or Roman soldier with the head of a hawk and the legs of a serpent. Well, this is the great hero, the great Logos. He is the personification of all the hero gods, all the savior gods, Mithra, Dionysus, Horus, lumping these in together and making it easy for people to just point to one thing instead of a million different things. Christianity is the final product of this. Julius Caesar conquers Gaul, conquers Africa, conquers the East Empire, makes himself Caesar, dictator of Rome. He gets assassinated. His conspirators, being Brutus, Cassius, and Cicero, along with many others, take control of the Senate. Cicero becomes the consul of the Senate, and what he does is actually pretty smart. He sends Decimus into the north to control Alpine Gaul. He sends Cassius and Brutus over to Syria and Greece to control those regions. And this made them the rulers of the post-Caesar Roman Empire for a short while. However, Mark Antony was determined to take control and avenge Caesar's death. So was Octavian, but not at first. In the beginning, Octavian actually was very fond of Cicero and even called him father after Caesar's death. It looks like Cicero was keeping him at bay because he knew he was the heir to Caesar and how much powerful he could be if he was given the reins, basically. Now, what happened was Cicero made one mistake. Octavian was going to war against Mark Antony in defense of the Roman Republic. And he asked Cicero to make him consul because they needed leadership to win the war against Antony. Antony, being a military genius, is no one you're just going to beat. Anyways, Cicero denies Octavian consulship so that angered him, and what he did was immediately march his legion into Rome and took over the Senate, made himself dictator. And what happened was Cicero fled. They found him, killed him, and then went to war immediately with Decimus in the north, in Gaul, and then Greece to go find Brutus and Cassius. And this was all successful. So Antony, Lepidus, who was partner of Julius Caesar, and Octavian, who is now Augustus Caesar, the heir to Caesar and the son of Caesar, avenged the death of Julius Caesar. So when this happened, the Romans thought that Julius Caesar was truly a divine being. He was a god, avenging himself from the grave. All of his conspirators are now dead, and Caesar is back on the throne, his son. That's why Augustus got the name Divius Iulius, which means son of God. They deified Julius Caesar, and this is 42 BC. When Julius Caesar became deified, that was the beginning of the Roman Imperial Cult as we know it. Trying to describe how glorious, and I don't use that term lightly, how triumphant Octavian or Augustus was. He might be the greatest ruler that ever lived, probably more impressive than even Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great, and even his father Julius Caesar. And the reason why I say that is because at such a young age, he avenges his father's death, takes over Rome, and then he establishes what's called the Second Triumvirate. The first triumvirate was Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Now they had the Second Triumvirate, and they actually wrote it into legal law that the empire will be divided up into three parts. Lepidus will get Africa. Augustus has Rome and Spain. And Mark Antony gets the East, which is Greece, Judea, Syria, and Egypt. Augustus' official reign isn't listed until from 27 BC till 14 AD. That's a long time. However, he really became the ruler in 42 BC. So he literally was ruling the world, the Western world, for almost 60 years. Unbelievable. For especially in that time period where there were so many usurpers and countries getting conquered and countries falling into famine. It's literally the most amazing accomplishment in the ancient world. So that is why he is known as the Divine Son, Octavian, Divine Augustus. He has all these titles. He is known as the Divine Augustus. He is like literally a god to the Romans. So what happened? Why does his reign start in 27 BC and not 42 BC, you might be asking? Well, what happened was Mark Antony started to get crazy, and he wanted to be full Caesar and full powerful. He wanted to have Rome by himself. He wanted to go against the agreement of the Triumvirate, and it started another civil war in which Augustus was triumphant over Mark Antony. So he came out of the entire storm of civil wars as the sole winner, and it just made him look like he had the divines on his side. So now let's get into the Imperial Cult. Pontifex Maximus. Julius Caesar is technically the first Pontifex Maximus of the new Roman Imperial Cult. And what that meant was the high priest, he decides what is canon, what is law under the religion of Rome. And what makes a difference between the Roman Imperial Cult and just the regular Roman cult from before was the Roman Imperial Cult went against the old ways of the ancient world, in which the ancient world, there was sort of this like unsaid law. Every country understood that every country had its own national deity. People in China didn't worship Jehovah. Only people in Judea worship Jehovah. Only people in Egypt worship Osiris. Only people in Syria worshipped Syrian gods. You get the point. Babylon had Marduk. Every country had its own individual god. When the Roman Imperial Cult started, they decided to get a little more progressive and adopt other gods from other lands. And the reason why is actually pretty obvious. If you're allowing other gods to be considered canon and be in the pantheon, countries that you conquer will be less resistant to you because you're allowed to worship your own deity and your culture can stay the same. just pay taxes and you'll be fine. Makes sense, right? The biggest sources we have for what exactly the imperial cult is Plutarch. Plutarch was a writer in the late 1st century, and he wrote a lot about canon in the Roman Imperial Cult. And the way it works is the Roman Imperial Cult was very big into astrology. For example, Hermes is the same as Mercury, who is also the same as Thoth in Egypt. And why would they choose these to be the same was because they would identify the gods with a constellation in the sky. So if Thoth was a certain constellation or a certain planet, then Mercury would be the same thing, and Hermes would be that as well. And then they would basically apply the same system to every country and every religion, and make it into one world religion, universal religion. The word Catholic actually means universal. The last religion to really be amalgamated into Roman imperialism was the Jewish religion. When Rome went into Judea, they would try to put up their statues of Caesar or of Jupiter. Judea did not allow it. The Jews of the ancient world are very similar to what the Muslims are today. They are extremely fundamentalist. They did not go against the grain. They followed their book to a T. They were very strict on their religious ways. No statues of Jupiter allowed in Israel. As a result of Rome trying to impose their religion on Judea was a string of civil wars. The Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, the final siege of 66 AD to 70 AD, and then there was a final revolt in the 120s, basically when Israel was finally crushed to ash, and just that was it. There was no more Israel until literally 1940. So now what happens is Christianity is like a messianic movement within Judaism. That James the Apostle, it was the leader of the first real group of Christians. The first original form of Christianity was just Judaism. Jesus of Nazareth was like prophet of the Father, and he wasn't really God yet. He was just a man who was the Lord, the mediator. You had one God and one Lord. It didn't necessarily mean they were the same. The Trinity didn't come till way later. That was an evolution of time. This messianic movement started to spread because Jews that weren't living in Jerusalem were seeing what was happening in the temple area in Jerusalem, and they were seeing that this was not really the way anymore. So messianic movements start to sprout up everywhere. You had Judas, you had Simon, you had all these different messianic leaders, and they're being killed for it. They're being martyred for it. Eventually what happens over time is Gnostic groups start infiltrating in these Jewish groups. They start meshing together, especially in Egypt. Egypt is where it really took off. It was where you had these Greek-speaking Jews applying Neo-Pythagoreanism, Neoplatonism into their Jewish religion, and it was sort of like this beginning of this new form of Gnosticism where the Jewish text, the Jewish scripture is the foundation, but they kind of steered it in a little bit different way. It also was big in Syria as well. Syria, the people that used to worship Mithra, were becoming more acclimated to this new Christian messianic movement. And when the Roman Imperial Cult identified that this would be a strong move on their part to recognize Christianity as a part of their own cult, what it did was, this is very smart too, it subdues the revolts. Because now the people who are revolting against you are now with you. So instead of revolting against Caesar, pay to Caesar what is Caesar's. Pay the taxes, turn the other cheek, you get the point. And this was very successful. Rome is at peace for the next 200 years. Hadrian has a 40-year reign. Trajan has a 40-year reign. That's 80 years of peace between two emperors. Marcus Aurelius has a few revolts in Gaul that he stomps out, but for the most part, Rome is really peaceful for the next 200 years. And then we get to Constantine. So when Constantine becomes emperor, there was a divide between the pagans who wanted the old Roman religion back, which is Jupiter, Dionysus, the old pagan gods, whereas the Constantine people are really strict in this new revised version of the Roman Imperial Cult, which is Christianity. They have a civil war, Constantine wins, and that's the end of it. He makes Christianity the state religion, and the rest is history. And another big reason why the Romans wanted to basically call themselves the new Israel is because the idea that Israel is a chosen nation by God was funny to them, because they saw themselves as the real Messiah, chosen country is Rome, not Egypt, not Judea, Rome. So they took this idea of a chosen nation and made it their own, which you get the Vatican out of that. Vatican is the new temple that replaces Jerusalem. So now we have a new string of deified Caesars. Julius Caesar is deified, just like Philip of Macedon was deified by the Greeks. His son, Alexander the Great, is deified not only in Greece but also by the Egyptians. He's known as the son of Atum Ra. Augustus is the same. He's deified. Claudius was deified, but that was kind of an unpopular deification. It was sort of a political move because nobody really saw Claudius as a divine emperor. He had a lot of issues. When Vespasian came around, it was the year of the 4 emperors, and that was the year where Judea was subdued by Vespasian himself and his son Titus. The Romans saw that as definitely a divine. He was definitely a divine emperor. He was deified. His son Titus is deified. And after that, every emperor is deified up until Constantine. So it became such a watered down thing. And they literally saw their emperors as a god. The idea of doing that became redundant. So why keep deifying all these emperors when we could just have one who represents all of us? Constantine makes Christianity state religion, but he allows the traditional imperial cult to stick around. He doesn't necessarily make them legal yet. So they stay around in the Byzantine era, and people are still worshiping Jupiter and all these other gods for a little while, until Justinian comes along. And Justinian is very much a zealot for the new Christian faith, and he decides that no more pagan gods, that's the end of it. And he goes along and just crushes the old imperial cult. And that's the end of it. It even stayed underground for a while, until the 500s. Emperor Anastasius. One of the biggest things about the Roman Imperial Cult is rituals. So they have these rituals where they would offer sacrifices to the gods. Sometimes they would slit the throat of a bull. They would have like a 2-story building with a big hole underneath the sacrifice. And they would slit the throat of the bull, and the blood would sprinkle onto the girl underneath her. And that was like this weird virgin sacrifice thing they would do. Now they do the same thing, but it's all spiritual. So they just offer bread or drink the wine. But this is all a progression from the weird things they used to do with these sacrifices. Very similar to what happened in Judea, where they would offer up on Passover. They would do the same thing. They would sprinkle the blood of a lamb on a rock, and that would wash away everyone's sins. They took that concept and ran with it, Christianity, which is very anti-Jewish if you think about it, because in Judaism, human sacrifice is an abomination, whereas in Christianity, the death of Christ is seen as the sacrifice that washed away all the sins of humanity. That has nothing to do with Judaism. In fact, the idea that Paul writes these epistles about the law being so obsolete and the law is barbaric and liberty is the true divine way. Christians don't understand how anti-Judaism that actually is. In Judaism, the Torah is the perfect word of God. Nothing can go against it. Anyone that comes along and says it isn't is not a Jew, which is why Judaism is still around, because of that thought process. And they're right. Christianity is not a continuation of Judaism. It's actually anti-Judaism. So Plutarch writes extensively on what is called the Logos, but he didn't invent this concept. The Logos was in a concept that was brought forth by Pythagoras and Plato. And they had this idea that there was a sort of a glue that binds everything in the universe together. And this glue is the word of the divines. And it's the law, it's the truth, it's logic, it's reason. That is what the Logos, the essence of the Logos is that. So he says that Osiris is the Logos, Mithra is the Logos, and Dionysus is the Logos. This is all written by Plutarch. The Book of John, written in 90 AD, starts off with, in Greek, in English it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. In Greek it says, in the beginning was the Logos. Logos doesn't necessarily mean the word, because the word lexi in Greek means word. So logos is a different concept. So it's the translation, you lose context from going from Greek to English. A lot of Americans don't know that. So the Pontifical College, which is the bishops and cardinals, that continued from the Imperial Cult to Catholicism. Basically, it was a transfer of power. The Nicene Council is when all of the bishops, priests, cardinals of the Roman Imperial Cult brought in, and this is the direction the Church of Rome is going in. And that's what happened. The Gnostics, who were the Marcionites, were very bitter about this because they had their own beliefs about Christianity, and they had their own ways of doing things, ways of worshiping. But they were basically told off by the Pauline Nicene side, the more Roman side, that they were the heretics and they had to follow suit or they will be excommunicated. And a lot of people actually were excommunicated. Oregon was one of those people. Each town had its own imperial cult temple or shrine. The imperial cult priests and priestesses known who held the title of sacerdote, sacrament basically. And when Christianity was made the new Roman religion, all of these shrines were basically either, if it was a shrine of Serapis or Dionysus and it had the beard and looked like Jesus, they would just say this is Jesus now. A lot of those Jesus shrines are actually shrines of ancient gods like Serapis. But if it was obvious that it wasn't, they would have to take down the shrine, destroy it basically. For the switch from paganism to Christianity, there was a number of temples built in honor of these deified gods. So you had the Temple of Julius Caesar was built in 44 BC. The Temple of Emperor Augustus was built 14 AD. Temple of Emperor Tiberius is built in 37 AD. I want to say actually there's probably 50 of these. And it goes all the way down to the Temple of the Emperor Anastasius in 518 AD. So you see that even when they became Christians, they were still doing these temples in honor of these emperors. Theodosius, Constantine, Joannes, Constantine III, Valentinian, Marcian, Eugenius. These are all Christian emperors who were deified. This idea continued even till today. The Pope is seen as the divine Holy See. He is seen as the literal successor of Peter, who was the successor of Jesus. So they see these popes, even today, they see the Pope as a divine being. So you see, when you look at the facts, you look at the history, and you look at the writings of Plutarch and all these other Eusebius, you see there's a clear progression of Roman religion. When the Eastern Roman Empire fell to the Ottomans in the 16th century, the Western Roman Empire, the real Rome, no longer focused on Asia or Jerusalem anymore. They lost 4 crusades in a row. That was it. They knew that it was over. They turned their sights onto Europe and the Western world. And that's when you had this new movement of Christopher Columbus, Magellan trying to find the New World. Because they knew that it was over for them. The 7 churches of Asia are all mosques now. Jerusalem is now a Muslim city. And that happened, it stayed that way for 500 years. Europe is a completely Christian kingdom. Christendom is the term for it. These churches built all throughout Europe. And this is known as the Holy Roman Empire. It's like a neo-Roman empire. But it's a lot more modernized. And the Catholic Church is doing all these new things where they have people you could pay to get your family member who's in hell. You can pay to get them out of hell. You can pay the church money. Super expensive amount of money too. If you got to be really rich to do this. There's sort of this scam that happens. It's going on where they're taking people's money and telling them that their loved ones are now in heaven. But they don't know this. It's all bullshit. What happens as a result of that is Martin Luther writes the 95 Thesis, and that's the birth of Protestantism. He was a Catholic. King Henry VIII sees this divide between the Lutherans and the Catholics, and he's seeing there's a new sect that he sort of brings forth. It's called Puritans, and they're just basically a new form of Christianity where it's not necessarily Lutheranism or Protestantism, but it's like its own, it's like in between. When the King James Bible was written in 1611, that is when we have officially two different types of Christianity. That was like the real end of like Catholicism and Orthodox Christianity, where we have just these like independently run churches that just do their own thing and have no oversight. And that continued into America, and this is what we see today with Baptist churches and evangelical churches. But that was called the Anglican Church. So that's all I have today. That's just wanted to show you the progression of Christianity from ancient Rome till today.